Good morning. My name is Leslie McClure. I'm a science reporter for KQED, which is the NPR affiliate here in San Francisco. I cover health. So we're just going to begin this morning with kind of an overview of the science that's currently happening and unfolding behind plant-based meats. We're going to keep our conversation focused on plant-based meats, so not clean meat yet at this point. We're going to begin by just allowing the speakers to have a couple minutes to introduce themselves, because they know themselves better than I do, and give you a sense of their background, where they're coming from, and maybe just a little bit of insight of where the conversation might go. So we're going to begin with Dr. Dean Ornish.
Thank you. Thanks, Leslie. It's great to be here. Thanks, Bruce Friedrich and everyone for including me. I'm the founder and president of the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute and a clinical professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. And for the last 40 years, I've directed a series of research studies showing for the first time that simple changes in diet, including a whole foods plant-based diet, which is why I'm here, moderate exercise, stress management techniques, including meditation, and what we call psychosocial support or love and intimacy, or to reduce it even further, to eat well, move more, stress less, and love more, that these same simple changes can not only help prevent but actually reverse the progression of the most common chronic diseases. And we started with heart disease, but the more diseases we study and the more underlying mechanisms we look at, the more reasons we have to explain why these simple changes are so powerful and how quickly people can get better. So we showed in a series of studies that heart disease was reversible, early stage prostate cancer, by extension breast cancer, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity. We just started the first randomized trial to see whether these same lifestyle changes can reverse the progression of early stage Alzheimer's in collaboration with Bruce Miller and his colleagues at UCSF. We found with Craig Venter that when you change your diet and lifestyle, it changes your genes, over 500 genes in just 3 months, turning on the good genes, turning off the bad genes. And with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for her pioneering work with telomeres, that you can actually lengthen telomeres, in a sense reverse aging at a cellular level. And just finished writing a new book that'll be coming out in January that Random House is publishing that puts forth a new unifying theory about why is it that these same diet and lifestyle changes can reverse so many chronic diseases. And the bottom line is that although we think of these diseases as being fundamentally different from each other, I'm suggesting that they're actually different manifestations of the same underlying biological mechanisms like chronic emotional stress and oxidative stress, changes in your microbiome and telomeres and gene expression and angiogenesis and so on. And each of these in turn is influenced by diet and these other lifestyle factors we talked about.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Peggy Lameau. I'm on the faculty in the Department of Plant and Microbial Biology here at Cal. And my position here at Cal is a little bit different than many of the professors that you may have met. I'm a cooperative extension specialist. That means I have a full research program, but my teaching is really outside the university, so talking with the public and consumers. So it's going to be very interesting to see. I'm interested to be here to sort of get the feeling for how people feel about plant-based meats. I have to say, personally, I mean, I'm a plant chauvinist. I think about plants all the time. I love plants. But I have to also admit that I was a plant-based meat skeptic, except that my son and his girlfriend are both vegetarians. And I sort of had this image of what plant-based meats and foods were before, and I'm just like, I don't want to try those, and they made me try them. I was like, wow, these aren't bad. And then I'm kind of thinking, okay, so now the question is, will people embrace these? And isn't that one of the challenges that many of you in the audience have, is convincing people that this is not only do they taste good, but why should they eat them?
Good morning. My name is Brian Plattner. I'm a process engineering director from Wenger Manufacturing. Last 20 years I've primarily spent working on equipment design and processing in the vegetarian textured protein market. Those of you who aren't aware of Wenger, Wenger has primarily works as an equipment supplier in extrusion and drying processing, and we've been in the textured protein market since its inception in the late 1950s, 1960s, and have spent lots of time and effort in developing products as they moved along. Kind of recent focus that we've been working on is when we move into some of these higher value-added products that are more recent, is working on equipment design, scale up, finding novel ingredients, and looking for food safety concerns as we work through this and these products are sent out into the marketplace.
Thank you. So my name is Ricardo San Martin, and I am the leading instructor and the research director of the Alternative Meat program at the Sutarja Center for Entrepreneurship here at Cal. And we started 2 years ago with the idea of teaching students entrepreneurship around a topic that is relevant and that they care for. So we identified the plant-based meat space to be one of these topics. And they offered me to lead this class, and my life I spent doing ingredients based on plants at an industrial scale, but I didn't know much of the topics. But then I realized no one really knows much that is not working in industry. So I said, well, I can learn that. And so my role in this class has been to create a relatively great learning space where we invite people like you and people like companies like Ingredion or Givaudan, and they come and tell us what are the gaps, what are the challenges they're facing. And so the students working in teams, they realize where there could be opportunities for them to do a startup. One of the recent startups that have come out of our class is called Terramino Foods. It's based on fungi and got a significant amount of funding in the last month. But more than that, I'd say that we believe a class is not enough. And so we're expanding it into a program. And based on the storytelling of all the companies that have come and talked to us, we think the storytelling is much richer than what they're telling us. They tell us what they have accomplished, and it's very technology-centric. And we think we have to focus on the customers. I do agree with Peggy. I mean, what are the drivers? How they see food as a system? It's not just like doing the technology map of this. Food has meaning for people. It's not like an app. It's not like a new cell phone. And so I have seen it in my class. It's hard to change behaviors. We have taught 160 students. I would say 5 or 10% are vegan or vegetarians, no more than that. And except for the TA, the teaching assistant, no one has changed their eating behaviors. These are millennials. So I think we need to study this more. It's not that it's not going to happen, but we need to understand. And there's very little independent, non-biased study in scientific literature by peer-reviewed, like the way you publish in academia. There's a lot of white papers, and there's a lot of saying, oh, I think if it's flavor. No. If it tastes good, they're going to buy it. No, it's the price. No, it's the texture. There are many assumptions, and I think at Cal we can leverage not only the STEM part of the equation, but the non-STEM departments to really work on these topics, and that's why we are creating this more expanded version of our class.
Hello, everyone. I'm Celeste Holt-Schiedinger. I'm the Director of Research at Impossible Foods. So I've been in this kind of field for a little while. I've been in Impossible Foods for 6 years. And I joined as a biochemist, so that's how I'm trained. Before that, I was a field biologist, really with the mission to protect biodiversity. So when I heard of Pat Brown's mission that we could replace the most destructive industry on this planet, animal agriculture, with a much more sustainable technology of using plants to create delicious meat, I was all in. So really the question of what if? What if we could make meat without compromise, and what would that take? I'm a biochemist, and many of my colleagues are, so how we solve that problem is say, can we break down that really complex problem into each of its molecular components to understand each of those molecular components, how they drive the sensory experience, the experiences that consumers are having, flavor, mouthfeel, cooking properties. And then we take those and look at those molecular molecules, and we try to identify in plants, do they have the same molecules? What is a cow made from? plants. So those same molecular components that were in a cow to create particular flavors that we love and crave are in plants as well. So we can go straight to the source and much more sustainable because the conversion to plants to animals is really inefficient. So what we have found is that these molecular components in plants can create the same experiences, the same sensory experiences on flavor, texture, nutrition as in beef. And we have the opportunity to remove things that we do not want, things that are not sustainable and things that are not good for the nutrition as well. So I'll give one example where is really a focus that my team has been working on is flavor. So one of the key components that we've identified is the driver for meat flavor that was not known before. That key driver is an essential component to all forms of life. It's called heme. You might have heard about it in biology class, and it allows for us, all humans, all mammals, to be able to breathe. It's also what allows for meat to have its metallic, raw, bloody flavor. And upon cooking, it reacts with simple nutrients to create the aromas of beef. So that's one of the discoveries we've made by taking the approach of deconstructing meat and then figuring out the underlying chemistry, and then let's recreate it using simple, natural ingredients. So where we are today, I think, is how we've kind of shown that we can make delicious meat from plants, but we're just at the beginning. A cow is not getting any better. We, every day, make prototypes that are much better than what we even have on the market, and it's really exciting to be able to think, we can get there, we can replace meat from a cow with plants and be able to have a much more sustainable ecosystem for us and all animals to live. So I'm excited to be here and have conversations with you. Just like our founder, Pat Brown, we're here for the mission. So to really do that mission, we need everybody. And there are so many things that we need to still solve.
It's gonna be a little awkward. Can folks hear me if I just yell the question?
Here you go.
No? Okay. Celeste, can you just kind of go on what you were just saying there in terms of, you said we're at the beginning of the journey. So in terms of the science right now, what still needs to happen and what are some of the biggest things that have happened? Just kind of give us a sense of on that arc at the beginning, but where are we?
Isn't technology great?
Okay, so what do we still have to do? Well, there is still a lot we need to do. So giving a little foundation of where we've come, one of the key things, at least in Possible, but I think in general of the field, is we're starting to really take the technologies from all fields and bring it into food and solve this really important question. So in biomedical fields, we've made huge advancements in the last 20 years. Those technology had not been applied to food until recently. So that transfer of knowledge from other fields is one of the key ways for quick transition and this multidisciplinary, the advancement of technologies in agriculture and the use of genetic modification are things that are not directly on food, but will continue to be able to grow in this particular space. So some of the key problem areas or areas that we still need to solve is really, what does the consumer want? You made the comment, we need to make sure that our assumptions of what a consumer wants and eats, we understand what those drivers are, and we make products that meet those customers' needs so that they want to replace it. A key example that I know of, and it kind of cross-functionally, is there are certain off flavors associated with plants that people do not like those flavors. So how do we grow crops that do not have them? How do we develop processing ways to remove those flavors? And then how do we make the products that have the flavors they specifically want integrated? There are many other aspects that need to be figured out of, we've created, say, a ground beef. It still can be better in many aspects. But really, to make the difference, we need to make whole cuts. So what are the technologies to bring that tensile strength and texturize these different proteins?
The question is, what really needs to happen before it takes off? Yeah, that's a complex one. Yeah. You surprised me with this question. Okay, there's so many things. I mean, I asked the same question to Pat Brown yesterday, and he elaborated, I mean, in a very long answer, you were there, right? And he mentioned the scalability problems. That's one, but also the sustainability of new crops. The crops that are being used today are the ones that are available at a large scale, like soy. I think the approach has been very much, I'm an engineer, chemical engineer by training, treating meat as an object. And I think Impossible has made a very good, approach, a unique approach by deconstructing that. But our main concern is that food is not an object. It's part of a system, and it's related to what's more complex to humans, which is meaning. And so even our students, they realize that what they eat is not the same but the way they invite their parents to eat at home. It has meanings. And then replacing one object with another object without realizing all the cultural implications, it's a very complex matter. So my main concern, if I were to pick something, being me coming from the STEM science, I think the science will be solved. I think Impossible has made great advances. I think that's not so much of the problem. The problem is why people are going to do this shift. We were talking before, I've been 6 years in the US and I haven't changed anything of my eating habit except for the oatmeal. Right? I'm an oatmeal fan now, right? But besides that, I eat what I was educated to eat. In my house. So it's much more complex. It has to be seen as a system, not as an object, a system of meanings. So I think research on that, for me, is the major thing we're facing.
Jump in.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's what I said originally was, I think we're going to get there, but the question is, how do we encourage people to, go across that divide and try it and then embrace it? But one thing I want to say is that I think in terms of plant biology, I think the way we've thought about developing plants and foods is very different than the way you all think about it, because we think about yield and nutrition and not necessarily the characteristics that you're going to be looking for. And I think this is going to be a big challenge for both plant geneticists and plant biochemists to sort of reorient their thinking in that direction. And I hope that people, well, I think if there's money there, people will do it, but I think there is a real need to sort of have our thinking changed about the way, where our end goal is.
So, first of all, I'm just thrilled to be here and to be having this conversation after doing work in this field for 40 years. I grew up in Texas eating meat all the time, chilies and cheeseburgers and chalupas, and liked it. And when I was 19, I went on a vegetarian diet and have been doing that ever since. But back in '93, when I began working with President Clinton, Hillary Clinton asked me to train the chefs to cook for them at the White House and Camp David and Air Force One. And one of the first things we were able to do was to get Boca burgers, which were the first soy burgers at the time, into the White House and Camp David and Air Force One, which he really liked. So I thought that was a good beginning. The reason that I'm so passionate about plant-based eating is not only for all the health reasons we talked about before, but also what's good for you is good for the planet. More global warming is caused by livestock consumption than all forms of transportation combined. I used to get into discussions with Al Gore about that, and he became a vegan a few years ago, even though he's a cattle rancher. So I just thought that also set a great example for everyone. And then there's the ethical concerns about if you don't have to create a lot of suffering, and particularly in factory farming, that's a good thing. And I was also on the board of the San Francisco Food Bank for several years and learned to my dismay that even in the Bay Area, 1 out of 5 kids goes to bed hungry every night, which is pitiful. And it turns out that it takes 14 times more energy and resources to make a pound of meat-based protein than plant-based protein. So if most people, even if we just had a meatless Monday, but if most people were to move in that direction, there's enough food today to feed everyone. No one really need go hungry. And so for all those reasons, I'm thrilled that we're having this conversation. The only I guess, question I have about what you were talking about with heme is that there have been 3 major large-scale meta-analyses looking at heme iron, and although it does make plant-based proteins, and I'm a huge fan of Pat Brown, and he's a real genius and a friend, and I just love the work that you all are doing together. The only concern I have is that, number one, both the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Meat are pretty high in fat and saturated fat, but also the heme, which is only found in the Impossible Burger, which also makes it unique. Also, there have been 3 major meta-analyses of large numbers of people that show that actually heme iron increases the risk of the most common forms of cancer, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease, because it causes oxidative stress and damages DNA. So I guess my question for you is, why, Voltaire once said the perfect is the enemy of the good, so I can see that it's definitely better to eat that than to eat a regular burger, but why include something that may be harmful in that way?
Just to clarify, why is it a lot better to eat that rather than a regular burger?
Because it doesn't have the animal protein and that you find. There's more and more evidence that, having been in a lot of fat versus carbs debate with Dr. Atkins and others, that there's more and more evidence that animal protein, particularly red meat protein itself, is harmful, in part because it causes interleukins and other things that cause chronic inflammation to occur. And chronic inflammation is one of the underlying mechanisms of so many different diseases, including heart disease, prostate, colon, breast cancer, type 2 diabetes, and other conditions like that.
Yeah, so addressing kind of nutrition and what we think about for nutrition. So it's key. When we're trying to make products, we need to think about how are we replacing this meat, and anything that is desirable, let's have those things. The things that are not desirable, can we remove them? And so on the point of heme is actually the most bioavailable iron, and it is essential to all forms of life. So there is a purpose to having heme, and I think very important in food as well. Particular the studies, there is many studies that have looked kind of to find if heme is driving cancer or other aspects that are in a negative way. The correlation is there is higher amounts of heme in red meat. And so that red meat has higher associations with cancer than, say, chicken. There are actually lots of different molecules in those particular meats that are different. The exact scientific evidence to say heme is driving cancer, we've reviewed lots. Pat Brown's probably much more of an expert on this than myself, and then also who is a MD PhD, and we have multiple MD PhDs on staff, always reviewing all of the literature. So we think there is no harm or risk to heme for eating, and we think it's bringing the bioavailable iron to our product. We would not be putting it in if we did not think it was extremely safe and not causing harm. If we see new evidence, we can change that. And one thing I want to say from before too is really the change that I think can happen now versus in the past is, can we make products that are as good or even more delicious than from an animal? That is really where I think that movement will begin, because before, people had a sacrifice on something that was so critical to them. How something tastes, is it convenient, is it affordable? If you can meet all of those, I think people will follow, because people don't eat meat because they like the fact that an animal is slaughtered. They eat it in spite of that. Think of yourself, of all of you that eat meat, do you eat it because you're happy that an animal was killed? People will come if you have the product and you meet the nutritional part, the conversations about, are these new ingredients safe in nutrition? I want that to take place because we want to keep improving on all the aspects. A key one on saturated fat and fat. yes, we have fat. It's, I think, essential to have fat in both your diet from a nutritional point of view and for flavor, but our profile can improve. And we have lab formulations and kitchen formulations that are better than our current ones, and I'm excited for those to be able to be released in the future to keep improving on those points.
I don't like being in this position because I love the fact that you're doing plant-based burgers and they're so much better than regular burgers. At the same time, I do feel it's important to point out that the FDA actually said that the FDA believes the arguments presented do not establish the safety of soy hemoglobin for consumption. There were 3 major meta-analyses that looked at hundreds of thousands of people that did find this association. Now, association is not the same as causation, but there's a lot of other evidence that, for example, that one of the reasons why women may not get heart disease at the same rate as men until they go through menopause is they start to bleed, they're bleeding when they're premenopausal, and that helps them to get rid of the excess iron, that there's a difference between heme iron and regular iron. And so even though it's true that there's not been a randomized trial showing this, the association is pretty striking in 3 different meta-analyses. The FDA has expressed concern about it. Is there a way that you could accomplish the same incredibly wonderful flavor profile that can induce a lot of people? And certainly, if the choice were having a better tasting burger with heme that's going to get a lot of people to eat it that otherwise would be eating regular burgers versus not, I would say that's a better choice. But I'm sure you must be looking at alternatives to heme that won't raise these questions so that more people can move to this direction.
Would you like to trade? I like the time, yes.
Then you can think.
So 2 points. So what the main thing my team works on is really flavor. So yes, we are always exploring all options of where the flavor comes from, what are driving it, how do we create that most delicious flavor that both emulate the particular meat like beef and actually add improvements. So we know what people love about meat, and we actually are learning more and more about that. So there's aspects people don't like about meat from a flavor standpoint, and there's aspects we could enhance and make even better. And many of those are not directly due to heme. Others, heme has a very crucial role in some of those flavor attributes. As we learn more, it could be replaced. And so the other point is on the FDA. We actually have a no questions from FDA. So heme is GRAS approved through the entire FDA process, which includes many, many experts reviewing all of the data on health, nutrition, and safety concerns, and there is no more questions. So really from our own internal, but the external panels across multiple fields have continued to show that there is no concerns. That doesn't mean we will stop there and say we should not continue to look at any concerns, improvements on any nutritional aspect, and find the best solutions for health and flavor and texture.
Let's make that the last word on this topic, and we are getting you another microphone.
Great, thank you so much. Brian, can you speak then, now that we've talked about flavor thoroughly, can you speak to texture? Where are we at in texture, and where do you see that going, especially as the demand for possibly other grains, other plants are introduced into this world?
Well, I think texture is kind of one of those challenges that we face because it really depends on where the market, what the market position needs to be. For example, if you just take the general textured vegetable protein market, you've got those in Asia, India, who tend to want vegetarian products, but they don't necessarily want a meat texture. They're naturally vegetarian from the beginning. That's just the way they've always looked at their lives, and so for them, they just need something that holds together. They need something that has a certain mouthfeel. When you get into the U.S., Western Europe, and you start working with markets where people are changing habits, where they're going from being primarily meat eaters to vegetarian, their texture drivers are a lot different. So they tend to want something that's more like what they normally have eaten in the past. So one of the challenges that we face on the processing side is figuring out, okay, when you say you want a better texture, what does that mean? So we need to identify, first of all, what do we need to accomplish? And then the second challenge that comes in with that is proteins are what allow us to create the texture, but not all proteins create the same texture. So just because you develop something with soy doesn't mean today you can go out and put a different ingredient in and get that to work. So honestly, I think a lot of the challenges isn't so much around the equipment processing. I think we have Wenger, as well as a lot of the other processors, equipment manufacturers, have a good handle on how to make the equipment work. The challenge now becomes is what do we use for ingredients? For example, maybe we need to spend probably time working on developing those proteins that are going to create certain gel properties, and maybe it's fibration, and we got to combine that with nutrition and flavor and processability. All of those play a role. As an example, I've seen some potato protein that makes a great texture, but the flavor is horribly bitter. So it's not something that works. So there's a lot of those challenges, and honestly, I think it's going to change. Peggy had mentioned this. I think it's going to change on the plant breeding side. Is instead of breeding soybeans for oil content, start breeding them for processability and flavor attributes. And maybe we start working with things like canola and go down the list of other protein-based ingredients to create materials for their processing, for their texture and flavor, rather than for other ingredients.
What do you see the grains or plants that might be introduced?
Where's our future? That's a marvelous question, and I'm not really sure how to answer that. Right now, I think the push is this general sense that it's anything but soy and wheat. Just because people want something different, and some of that's because they want to differentiate themselves in a market. Some of it has to do with some of the nutrition, dealing with celiacs, people that have soy allergies. But I do think there needs to be maybe a little bit finer point on that. Someone will come to me and says, well, what else can we do? And a lot of times for us, our response is, well, what do you want to see in it? Do you want something that is legume-based? Do you want something that maybe has canola in it, or maybe a flax protein or a potato? Because I think we need to identify that and then work backwards from that direction, because I think there's a large range of products that can be texturized.
Peggy, can you speak to some of the grains that you see as most exciting or kind of up and coming? And then also, what role will genetically modifying what we have on the market play?
Well, that's $1 million question, actually. I've worked on cereals for all of my plant career. No? Okay, sorry. I've worked on cereals my entire plant career, and many of them, the ones that we all think about, wheat and barley and rice. However, more recently, some of my students became interested in sort of what we call ancient grains. So we started working on millets and sorghum, and I think that they have a lot to offer. I think one of the problems, however, is when Brian was talking about, well, what do we want and what do we need? If all of a sudden everybody decided that they wanted to do sorghum-based products, we don't necessarily have all that ready. There's going to have to be a shift in, what we're going to provide to you, and it doesn't happen like that. And I mean, even if it's something that we know about today, like millets, we know that they have a fairly good protein content as cereals go. They're not great. They're not like soy, but they do have a fairly good protein content. And they have some other minerals that are better. But, could we deliver to you, tons and tons of that tomorrow? No, probably not. And if we wanted to get rid of some of those off flavors, there are ways to do that. And we can do it either through some of the genome-based approaches that we have now that would allow breeding to occur more quickly, because breeding in general, if you're going to create a new cereal crop, for example, can take 10 years or maybe even more than 10 years. With some of the new genome-based technologies, we can speed that up quite a bit. We can also use genetic modification or genome editing, and that comes along with its own issues, which have to do mostly with consumer acceptance. But there are ways to do that, and certainly some of the companies now are using those kinds of approaches. And I think the more we learn about the kinds of things that industry is interested in, the more plant biologists, as either biochemists or geneticists, we can address those issues, because we know, we have the genome sequence of many of the crops that we work on now, and we can understand, in a way, how they work, and we can target a lot of what we do specifically to just individual pieces of genetic information rather than, going to the whole genome. So.
Just one quick follow-up. One of the things I do see quite a bit in the industry is, Peggy makes a great comment, is, well, what do we really need for proteins? And really the big three when it comes to extrusion-based texturization, wheat, soy, and pea are the three best out there. And what we really start to see today is we start to see substitution. So maybe they'll add a little bit of potato protein or a little bit of flax or some other protein source as a substitution and still be able to manage texture and make a good product. And as we begin to learn more of that, what you start to see, and this is what I expect to see coming, is you'll start to see a shift at more and more of those proteins. So, and that will add to the market pressure of being able to create them. And that gets processors making it, that gets it down to back to the farmer, because eventually we're going to have to incentivize the ag industry in the U.S. and throughout the world to be able to grow some of these. If they're not going to make money, they're not going to provide those proteins.
No, wait a minute. I'm in the middle. So I just want to say something really quick, and that is, genetic diversity to me is extremely important, and the more we just focus on a few crops, this is a dangerous place for the world to be, so I hope we go there.
I just want to move to, first I want to thank again Bruce Friedrich for organizing this conference. It's just thrilling to me to be here and the vision that is behind it, having seen what a powerful difference changes in diet and lifestyle can make. And part of what I wanted just to talk briefly about is what enables people to make sustainable changes in their diet. And part of what we learned is that fear is really not a good motivator, but joy and pleasure and feeling good are. And because these underlying biological mechanisms in our bodies are so dynamic, even a single meal that's either a plant-based meal or an animal-based meal affects blood flow to your brain, affects blood flow to your skin, affects blood flow even to your sexual organs. And there's a wonderful new film coming out that James Cameron, the legendary filmmaker, made in collaboration with Luis Hoyos and James Wilkes and others, called Game Changers. That'll be coming out probably later this fall or early, and it was shown at Sundance last year, and what they found, earlier this year I should say, and they did, there's this one scene where they had these three athletes and they had them eat a single plant-based meal, and then they used a machine that measured the frequency and hardness of their erections at night. And then they did the same thing with a single meat-based meal, and it was an organic grass-fed beef meal. And they found that they had 300 to 500% more frequent and 10 to 15% harder erections after a single plant-based meal than a meat-based meal. And so the film crew apparently became vegan after filming this. And I think that those are the kinds of things that I'd love to see marketing. As important as it is from global warming and all the things which also bring meaning to people's lives, just the idea that the quality of life is so much better by eating this way. That's what's good for you really is good for the planet and vice versa.
Did she want to?
I want to give Ricardo a chance here to jump into the conversation. So as you're teaching your students, and your students are obviously probably feeding you as well, what are they most interested in, and what projects or group projects, et cetera, have you seen that are pretty exciting in terms of where they might contribute to this conversation?
This is great being in the middle, because I got to go lecture at Ricardo's class, and the excitement of those students and what they could do was amazing.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, if I have a bad day and I face them, I get up and they cheer me up. So I think we've been working with challenges that industry has been posing us, and one is bitter taste. And so last semester we worked on students exploring how CRISPR technology can modify the bitter taste of peas. So the team name is CRISPy. And we've been working also on how to incorporate fat to extruded products. And we have been working recently also in the clean meat space. We have explored that, and so this is a hard word for me to say, decellularized. And so trying to combine approaches that can be taken from the way plant-based meat is to see how it can affect and lower the costs and better the products for the clean meat industry. So those are some of the challenges they're working. I would say I learn a lot from my students because they reflect on these products. I send them first to taste them and to see what they think of it. And that's where I think the value of a university comes in, because we need to keep on working with industry, but at the same time we need to be independent of industry. This is a new emerging field. We don't want any unintended consequences afterwards. So it's an industry that needs checks and balances. And we are in a position to be unbiased. We don't have any huge amount of funding behind us, actually very little. So if anyone wants to contribute, I mean, it's very welcome, right? So, but the thing is, and because of that, we can look at the other side of the story, like the supply chain, the health benefit. Is it sustainable or not? I mean, the numbers are being repeated and repeated and repeated, but each of these products have very, very refined ingredients that go into that. What's the carbon footprint of those ingredients? Every company will tell us, we've done the studies, and I ask them, where are they published? And that's where the conversation sort of ends. And so we need that to be open to the public, and that's where the students come in. So this semester we're doing independent research, each student focus on one of these questions. Okay.
So one thing to follow up, which is everyone's talking about we need additional proteins. I totally say that's very, very essential, and it starts from kind of the ground up. What are the seeds that have the genetic material? How are they grown? How are they processed? And really provide a toolbox to be able to create all of these different products. And that scale, the amount of protein we need and quality protein that we need is huge. And that requires everybody to be able to work on each of those sides and as fast as possible to bring them up. Aside from even just extrusion, one of the key things about meat is its ability to have transitions. The proteins are in a native state, and upon cooking or transformations in different types of dishes, they need to have functionality. Our current ways of processing proteins remove a lot of that functionality and keep flavors that are bitter or cardboard, things that people really do not like. So those technologies is really, I think, one of the foundations that we need much more people and at the university level. The other one I'll put a pitch, because you mentioned bitterness, is our knowledge of perception of food. What is actually going on from the receptor level of molecules binding to your tongue or your nose, in your mouth, the mouth coating? How does that actually give a picture in your brain of what you're eating, so that if we knew that, we'd have a better ability to recreate that from that fundamental kind of neurobiology and perceptual research?
I appreciate the question. Well, one is, again, how much better you feel. You know, as I mentioned, you think more clearly, your brain gets more blood, your face gets more blood, you look younger, your heart gets more blood, you can actually reverse heart disease. But in addition to pleasure, the other thing that we found really enables people to make sustainable changes is a sense of meaning. And you know, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed, like what can I do as one person about global warming or feeding the hungry, or, you know, what's going on with the environment. And when people understand that just what you choose to put in your mouth each day has a major impact on all of these things, it imbues those choices with meaning. And if they're meaningful, then they're sustainable. So, you know, Susie Cameron has a new book coming out next month that I wrote the foreword to, called OMD, One Meal a Day. In other words, if you could just have one plant-based meal a day, and to recognize, why am I doing this? Well, because it's going to free up resources to feed hungry people. It's going to have a lower carbon footprint. It's going to reduce global warming. It's going to be, I won't have to kill an animal today to have my food. Those are the kinds of things that when you can connect what you're doing with a sense of meaning and purpose, it makes them sustainable. So I would love to see an advertising campaign that not only emphasizes that it's good for the environment and good for all these things, which it is, but and that it makes you feel better, which it does, but also that it can be fun and cool and sexy and hip and convenient and crunchy and delicious for people to eat this way. The other big misconception is, am I going to live longer, or is it just going to seem longer if I eat a plant-based diet, And to try to show people that the food can be delicious and nutritious, and that's why I love what Impossible is doing to show the food can be delicious as well as plant-based, and what Beyond Meat and others are doing to really, and that's why I'm so excited by this conference, to really show that those are false choices. You can have foods that's delicious and that's good for you and is good for the planet.
I have a stream of questions here about GMOs, so I want to turn over the last question here to Peggy. In terms of, is genetically modified, do we have to? Does GMO have to be part of this world? Do genetically modified ingredients, do they have to play a role, or can we move forward without them playing a role? And if they do have to play a role, how are we going to convince consumers who are worried about GMOs that it's okay to eat them?
Okay, I have 50 seconds. And I have to say, I've been working in that arena for 25 years. I don't have an answer to the question about how do you make it okay to consumers that genetic, I can talk about it because I do that. So I know what we're talking about. Can we go forward without it? It will be more time consuming and more difficult because we can make especially with genome editing, we can make very precise changes that we really can't do in any other way. And that allows us to do some of the things that you've already mentioned that are important to be done. And I think a lot of what's going to happen or how this is going to be accepted is going to depend on how it's regulated, and not just here in the United States, but worldwide. Because even though we might be able to have it here in the United States, we can't export things, and that becomes a really big problem, and it already is a really big problem.
She did it, folks. 50 seconds. Good job. Thank you all for coming this morning. Thank you all for coming this morning.